And think about that from a historical perspective. Can you imagine what Thomas Jefferson's podcast might have been like? Or, George Washington, or Alexander Graham Bell, or the Wright brothers. Now that's a podcast I'm listening to. I mean, a podcast is a digital recording of what we're thinking and what we're talking about today that could be heard hundreds of years in the future. Podcast by Friday with Bill Griggs and Kingsley Grant. We help people to create their minimal viable podcast by taking bold action to defeat procrastination and to get their voices heard. Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Griggs.
And I'm Kingsley Grant.
And this is Podcast by Friday. How are you doing today, Kingsley?
I'm doing awesome. Doing great, Bill. How about yourself?
I'm doing fine. Hurricane missed you down there in the great state of Florida?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so thankful to God that we got by this time. It just skirted by. I got some rain and some wind, but nothing to talk about. My lights went out, but I was, 24 hours and it was back.
Yeah, you just never know what's going to happen. Many times things can sneak up on you very quickly, and that kind of brings us a little bit to what our topic is today of why you shouldn't wait. We have 5 reasons that you should launch your podcast by Friday.
And like you said, Bill, I think we do have those interruptions of life that's we don't prepare ourselves for. And the quicker we can do things, the better it is, right?
I agree. And, you got to think about, the best use of your time, the best use of your resources, and whether or not what you have to say is really a burning passion for you and a desire to get stuff out there. And that's why I think it's very important that we consider these things. So I remember when we were getting started with this podcast, Kingsley, that you and I spent a good deal of time just talking and brainstorming at the Podcast Movement Conference. And then we went out and we took action. And we got our podcast started right away.
Yeah, it was really a quick turnaround time because in a few days after getting back, we said, let's do it, and we had it up and running. So I think we've learned some things that I believe we're going to be able to help the listener today on why we believe that your podcast by Friday is really it's achievable, and it's something that they can do too.
Yeah, that's the point. It is achievable. We've had several people that we've worked with who have launched their podcast by Friday, and they have had good success with getting it done. And I think that, we should try and explain to our listeners some of the reasons why. And so I think we should just jump in, Kingsley. What do you think?
Hey, I'm all game. Let's get it going.
All right. The first reason that you should launch your podcast by Friday is because momentum cures procrastination.
That's a really big one, Bill, because I think sometimes, I'm a person like this. I know that I suffer from procrastination-itis. I find sometimes that's one of my biggest problem in getting things done. And I agree. When I have momentum going, I find that I can just knock things out like that, and it overcomes the whole, as you mentioned earlier, we've talked about earlier, the analysis paralysis that takes place, right? Mm-hmm. So it really cures, in my regard, it cures me. It helps me in my procrastination.
I know when I did my first podcast, I waited nearly a year to do the first episode. Yeah, you're telling me, wow. Before I even got to the point of doing the first episode. And it was a year of feeling bad about myself because I knew that I wanted to talk about my topic, but for whatever reason, fear, procrastination, whatever it was, I just wasn't pulling the trigger. I just was not going forward and launching the podcast. And it wasn't until I made a commitment with another person that I would launch my podcast by the following Friday that I actually took action.
And so you found for you that momentum, you gained some momentum in doing that which helped you in the area of procrastination.
Yeah, because I mean, we not only put up the podcast, we built a website, we did all those things, we got a mailing list started, the whole 9 yards, the things that we did based on the fact of going forward. You know, once we get the ball rolling, things really pick up.
And you know what I find also too, that really, if you're not ready to do what it is you have on your mind, and by Friday, the chance is you won't even be ready in a month or 2 months or 3 months, because the chance is someone listening right now may have been procrastinating and not getting their podcast going for weeks, like you, a year, right?
Yeah.
So
you're really. I mean, if you're not ready to go in a week, then you're probably not going to be ready to go in a month or a year or whatever time frame. You know, there comes a time when you need to act on whatever it is that you're planning. And this, I believe, getting the momentum going will really stop you from procrastinating.
Okay. So that's number one. Momentum cures procrastination. Number two, deadlines make you focus.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I found this to be very true when I was in school. If I had an essay due or a big test due, I usually waited until the very last minute before I'd start studying. But that study that I was doing was very focused and very concentrated. You know, I was focused in on exactly what I needed to get done to get a good grade on that paper, or to produce something, because I was focused on it. I knew I had a deadline, and I knew I had to get it done by a specific time.
So that deadline, Friday, in this case, for the person who's listening, because I know I only have a few days to work with. And that's, there's a statement, Bill, you may be able to help me with that. It says something about time shrinks, or time expands, or work expands based on the amount of time you give it. Mm-hmm. So if I give myself by Friday, whenever that might be for me, to get this podcast up, the chance is I get it up and running and done by Friday, because I'm more focused on that than if I think 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the road, I'm like, I have time. I just kind of make it through, laissez-faire approach, right? And then that hurts. So that focus, by having it by Friday, it does change things.
Yeah, it does. It's funny. This isn't specifically related to podcasts, but it is related to my other business, which is working with the CNC router tables. On my other podcast, the CNC Router Tips podcast, I have a project that is due for someone who has a bridal show. And so I'm making up a nice little design for them. I have actually only about 10 days left in which to, execute this. And if I don't focus, I could miss that deadline, and that could ruin their show. That could ruin, my growing business. And it's the same with the podcast. If you don't focus to meet your deadlines, you're going to fail.
Yeah, and I think you find things to put in the middle because there's no urgency around that. So I think the deadline creates an urgency that says, you know what, I need to get it done by Friday. So I'm gonna put all my resource, my energy into that one thing. And surprisingly, what you could not have got, not you couldn't, but you didn't get done in a whole month or a whole year, suddenly you're able to get it done by Friday. So I do believe deadlines deadlines make you focus to get your podcast up by Friday.
And it's funny, because you're taking such concentrated focus and effort in a short time frame, you're going to find out that rule number 3 is true. And that's that swift action gets you in the game faster. Now, for me, it was very important to launch my podcast when I did. Okay, because I was excited at the time when I was launching my podcast. And when I was excited, and took action and got my podcast recorded, I got things out there faster, and it got me a faster start. I mean, I was able to then reach out to people in social media. I was able to talk to other people and, really build up the fact that I had started my podcast. And because I was doing things very fast, I put out a whole bunch of episodes in rapid succession right when I started. Mm-hmm. And, that got me in the game going faster, and then if I had waited 2 weeks or, a month between each episode or, slowed it down, because I'd taken some quick, swift action, I knew I was in that podcasting game quicker.
And I think also too, Bill, it gives you a chance to test out an idea quickly and make correction if needs be. So we've heard many times, fail fast, because you have a chance to now know what is working, what's not working. And the longer you sit on it, the more you're questioning whether or not something would work. And you haven't even tested the idea, but you're self-sabotaging, so like, man. But the more you sit on the idea, the more like, the longer it is to do it. So if you can just get started and get going and taking that swift action, I do believe by getting in the game faster, it give you a chance to fail fast, correct fast, tweak fast, learn fast. All those things tend to happen, and it overcome, I believe, at the same time, inner self-doubts that may begin to crop up and eat away from you on the inside.
Yeah. Have you ever done some amazing physical feat and afterwards not remember how you did it?
Yes.
Because you were moving so fast at the time, you just did it. You didn't think about it. It just happened, and it was flawless. And if you tried to do it again, you probably couldn't. Well, this is the same kind of thing. You're taking swift action, and that's just the way it is. When you're moving, the world tries to get in line with your train.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah. So that was number 3.
Swift action gets you in the game faster, and which leads us to number 4. Better use. So tip number 4 is, or reason number 4 is better use of your investments.
Yeah, that's very important. When you think about it. I was just going over some of the money things that are around podcasting. So, when you're starting in your new podcast, you have to get web hosting to host your website so that people can go and find you at podcastbyfriday.com. Okay, so you have to pay for hosting for that. You also have to pay for hosting for your podcast episode somewhere. Your audio hosting. So you're paying for that monthly. And you're probably paying for a mailing list and any number of other things. And if you establish those accounts and then don't do anything with them for a few months while you're trying to, quote, get everything together so you can, launch your podcast, you're wasting one of your most valuable resources is your money, because you've got those accounts sitting there doing nothing. But if you put something in there the Friday after you register those accounts, then you've got 3 whole weeks out of that month where your content is doing stuff.
But that's a very good point you're making, because I find sometimes, I have signed up for something and paid, on a monthly, recurring fee for a service. And I wasn't ready to use it yet. I know I will use it eventually. So I said, okay, let me get it right now because it's of good value. The price is right. It's a sale. I got the sale. And you know what? I have bought, especially in the case of online classes from Udemy, for example. How many times I've got there for $10 for a course, and I say, I really need to get this, but because I didn't have a need right now, I spend that money and it's sitting out there. I haven't looked at it yet, and that have happened in services like other services I bought. That if I think I'm going to use it, which I probably will use it or have used it, but it's sat there. You've invested so much money in your hardware and software and other whether it's recording stuff or the trend you've had, it's money you've spent that's just sitting there, and I believe that why you need to do by Friday is to recoup the fact that, you not recoup the money, but at least not let your investment just go to waste, so to speak. Just sit there and gather dust,
Mm-hmm.
in other words.
Yeah, I know there have been many times when I bought new software or whatever and then not used it. And then, 6 months, a year later down there, I'm looking around on my desktop and say, I wonder what this is. And then I click and I said, oh, that was that great YouTube video editing software that I was going to use. And, and I'd already spent the money and, hadn't gotten a bit of use out of it. So it was not a wise investment in that respect.
Yeah, I think that's why by having it, one of the reasons to really, like we said, in the 5 reasons to launch your podcast by Friday, that better use of your investments, I believe it's one of the reasons. To me, money is I don't like to waste money,
Mm-hmm.
and sitting just watching that thing sit there and sit there and sit there. Whether some people are using external recorders and they're invested in a recorder, or they invested into microphones, they invested into mixers, they invested in all these things,
Mm-hmm.
and it sits there. That's really not a good use of your investment. So I think by having a Friday focus to get your podcast launched, it will help you to use what you've invested in.
And there's one more thing, an important part of building any online business, including podcasts, which, that falls into that category, is you generally will have a mailing list of some kind. And mailing list software is not cheap, and if you're not using that money and you've invested in a mailing list and it's just sitting there month after month, chugging away and taking money out of your pocket instead of putting money in your pocket. So it's much better if you go out, you launch your podcast, you get your mailing list up, and you start receiving, communications from your listeners and your followers, and sending them valuable information, which is why they are listening to you in the first place, to get and contact with you and to find out what it is that you want to share with them.
And I think, and I think you mentioned a good point. I think you mentioned about the fact that on email you're invested into that host, whatever it is. But also, I think of this way, as you were talking, this came to my mind. They've also invested, and some people have invested in building out a website, and they paid a lot of money in building a website. It's now been hosted on WordPress or wherever else it is, and they have the URL they bought. That's money, and it just sits there. So I think having this idea of getting it done by Friday is a way of saying, okay, I can justify the fact that I invested this money because now I'm getting my podcast launched by Friday.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And the quicker you take action, the more effective you're going to be, and the quicker you're going to get a return on your investment.
Which leads us to number 5, because we're speaking about urgency here, and this one is a very special one. I think this is one that really may sound a certain way, but hear us out before you shut us down when you hear this one, because this is a very special one. So go ahead and tell us what it is.
Well, reason number 5 why you should launch your podcast by Friday is someone could die.
That's right.
Someone could die. It might be you. It might be your listener. But somebody could die if you don't get your podcast out by Friday. Now, I know this sounds kind of flippant, but you think about it. Your main goal when you do your podcast is to get your voice out there, to get your voice heard, to put the information that you have inside you out there so that others can share and take part in it. And if you don't share your podcast, that one person who's out there in the world who needs desperately the information that you have may pass away. Or you might pass away before you give it to them.
That's true. And, I think it's, we kind of joked initially, but really it's a serious matter because it happens all the time. And I believe that there's a reason why that person even have the idea of wanting to do a podcast, because they believe they have something of value that they want to share with the world, or they would not even consider a podcast. So as you're listening right now, the only reason why you have even entered the space of podcasting is because you believe you have something of value, very important, that someone needs. And we're simply saying, hey, that person is like, okay, say, get it to me because I could die tomorrow if I didn't get that one thing that you have. So be responsible and get it out there.
Mm-hmm. Kingsley, one of the things that you covered in your podcast, the midlife launch one time, I recall, you were talking about robbing the graveyard. You gave a speech about this at Podcast Movement, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I did. And thanks for bringing that, Bill, because I believe so strongly in urgency, And the speech I gave about the graveyard, robbing the graveyard, is that so many people today, have died with a dream inside of them that never get out. So I use my mom as an example because my mom was a school teacher all her adult life and was a great school teacher, no question about that. And my mom, towards the end of her life, my sister asked her this question and said to Mom, if you could do anything else other than teaching, what would that be? My mom surprised my sister by saying, I wanted to be a nurse. A nurse. And that nurse, Bill, died in my mom. Now, granted, she was a great school teacher. However, I can't imagine what she would have done had she become a nurse because of her personality and just her given spirit. So that dream died inside of her. And I have made up my mind that every single person I engage or interact with, I wanted to get this message out to them. Get that dream, get that podcast, get that whatever it is started, and let's rob the graveyard of any further riches. And if you don't get it out right now, then the chance is the graveyard could become richer because that dream died within you. So yeah, someone could die, or you could die with that dream inside of you. It may sound morbid, but it's a reality.
Yeah, and it is. It may sound morbid to some, but it is a reality of the fact that if you don't take the time to share what it is that you're experiencing, what you know, what you want to learn, and really take the chance to get your voice out there so that somebody can listen. It's a tragedy because we only come this way once, and our message is important. I believe everybody has a message in them. Some single thing that they're really good at and that they could really help somebody with. And it's downright shame if they don't get the chance to share whatever that message is with someone. And one way that you can do that in perpetuity is through a podcast. A podcast is a digital recording of what we're thinking and what we're talking about today that could be heard hundreds of years in the future. In perpetuity, as long as there's some digital format out there and some way to play it, someone could play a version of your podcast and learn whatever it was that you had to teach. And think about that from a historical perspective. Can you imagine what Thomas Jefferson's podcast might have been like? Or, George Washington or Alexander Graham Bell or the Wright brothers? Now that's a podcast I'm listening to, So get it out there,
Bill, that's a very good point. And I know we don't want to belabor the point, but I think, one of the chapters in my book, The Midlife Launch, is that very same idea of responsibility, because I share in one of those chapters about we have a responsibility because we've been given a gift. We've been given a message, and there's someone else out there who's waiting for that. And they, like you said, their lives can be made different, better with what we have. And I think it's irresponsible to not get that out there to that person who is just saying, is somebody out there with my cure, which is your message, and who is that? Who have it? And you know what? That podcaster you're listening right now, you have it. So our whole point of this, and I hope you're hearing us really well, that these reasons to launch your podcast by Friday, I believe we save this one here to really drive home the point of making it where you need to get it out and get going on this and don't procrastinate, as we talked about in our first point, our first reason today.
Kingsley, I know we're going a little long today, but I'd be remiss if I didn't share this story. And it really does come back to this point in particular. This is the section of our show where we would normally pause for a word from our sponsor. Now, if you would like to be that sponsor of the Podcast by Friday show, and you have a product or service that you feel would be of benefit to new entrepreneurs starting their new podcast, then contact us at podcast@podcastbyfriday.com, and we'll see if you'd be a good fit. Now back to the show. Kingsley, this may make us go a little bit over, but I think I'd like to tell a story that relates to this very well. About 6 years ago, when my mother passed away, I was traveling cross country from New York to Arkansas to attend the funeral, and I had loaded up podcasts onto my iPad. I was very new to podcasting at the time, but I was, searching for anything that would kind of take my mind off the fact that, I'm going to a funeral. And I'm listening to Internet Business Mastery podcast with Jeremy Franzen and Jason Van Orden. And they were talking about one of their star students, Pat Flynn, which, we both know Pat from the Smart Passive Income podcast.
Yeah.
But at that time, I'm not even sure Pat had a podcast yet of his own. But the point is, I was searching for something that I wanted to do with my life at that point, because I was about to retire from my job with the state, and I hadn't figured out what it was I wanted to do. But after listening to these podcasts across country, I realized that I wanted to do some internet marketing. And, essentially, here was Pat Flynn, just an ordinary guy who'd gone and built a big business, through internet marketing, through using the methods that these guys on the Internet Business Mastery podcast had talked about. And so, during the course of that trip, I figured out what it was I wanted to do. And I would have never had the opportunity to go into internet marketing, online marketing, and into podcasting if it hadn't been for that trip and listening to those guys get their message out there, get their voices out there.
And so that was, had they not started their podcast, had they not gotten it up and running, you would not have had a chance to listen to that. You wouldn't have a chance to hear the story. You wouldn't have had a chance to start get your ideas, or the very taste of what you had. And today we would not be doing this, possibly not be doing this podcast by Friday, and now challenging our listener to do the very same thing.
Mm-hmm. And, it's funny because you consider it now, fast forward 6 years, I've met Pat Flynn. I've talked to him at length, and I could have never, this was just some guy in my earbuds, that I had never heard before that. But now we talk about him a lot on this podcast. I think he's the real deal. He's an awesome person, and I would have never heard his message if I wasn't listening to the podcast, and if he hadn't put his podcast out.
That's a very, very good point. I think that's really a good way to kind of, go back, as I said earlier, how this is a very pertinent story, that it ties into the very fact that, someone could die, and getting your voice out is so important. So, Bill, we want to summarize then the 5 reasons to launch your podcast by Friday. And the first one was momentum cures procrastination.
That's right. And number 2 was deadlines make you focus.
And number 3, swift action gets you in the game faster.
And number 4, you get a better return on your investment.
And number 5, someone could die. Get your voice out now.
Yeah, fantastic. So those are the 5 reasons why we believe you should launch your podcast by Friday. And I hope that helps you in your journey. And
I think, we want to make sure that people understand that we want to hear from you. We want to hear from you which are these 5 reasons that kind of resonated with you. And to do that, you can email us at podcast@podcastbyfriday.com. And also you can be a part of our group on Facebook, at Facebook.com/groups/podcast by Friday and interact with us. We will be in there to talk with you and share with you, and any ideas or questions you may have, we can answer that there, or you could just email us, as I mentioned earlier, at podcast by Friday.
Now, this episode will be out very shortly, and it will be episode 12 of the Podcast by Friday. Even dozen. So you can find information on this episode and the show notes and everything at podcastbyfriday.com/12, the numbers 1 and 2. That will get you to the show notes for this episode.
Look forward to hearing from you very soon.
Okay, and tweet us. You can tweet me at Bill Griggs, and you can tweet Kingsley
at Kingsley Grant, KINGSLEYGRANT.
And we'd love to hear from you, or leave us a message or a rating and review. So if you would like to leave a rating and review for the Podcast by Friday podcast, there will be directions on the show notes page on how to do that, including a video that we made that shows you step by step everything you need to do, including links that you can click. Thanks for listening in to this episode of Podcast by Friday. I'm Bill Griggs.
And I'm Kingsley Grant. Thank you for joining us on this episode. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Podcast by Friday. Take bold action to create your minimal viable podcast today. Check out new episodes at podcastbyfriday.com or on iTunes or Spreaker.